What if Vikings built a global empire? What if history got one thing completely wrong? What if Vikings weren't just raiding barbarians, but the civilization that built the world's first global empire? Imagine this. Maps don't look the way they do today. Instead of English, people speak Old Norse. And America became a Viking stronghold centuries before Columbus. So was this actually possible? Or did history change because of just one different choice? Who were the Vikings really? Most people misunderstand the Vikings. They weren't just raiders. They were also skilled sailors, traders, explorers. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, they left Scandinavia and raided England, reached the coasts of France, traveled deep into Russia, and even set foot in North America. Yes, Leif Erikson reached America nearly 500 years before Columbus. But something was missing: unity. The Vikings were never a single power. They were divided into clans. Each followed its own leader. But what if that changed? What if they united? Now we change the course of history. Imagine this. A leader rises, charismatic, intelligent, and ruthless. He unites all Viking tribes under one banner. He is not just a king. He becomes an emperor. At that point, everything changes, because the Vikings' greatest advantage was naval dominance. Their longships were fast, lightweight, able to navigate rivers, which means they could control not just coasts but inland territories as well. Now the goal is no longer raiding. It becomes conquest, settlement, system building. At this point, the Vikings begin to think like Rome. The transformation of Europe. If the Vikings had united, Europe would look completely different. England had already fallen before. But this time it wouldn't just be raided. It would be fully colonized. Northern France, instead of becoming a small region like Normandy, would fall entirely under Viking control. And then, expansion into Germany, access to the Mediterranean, contact with Byzantium. Here a critical shift happens. The Vikings wouldn't need to convert to Christianity. Instead, Norse mythology would spread. That means Odin, Thor, Loki would not just be myths, but central religious figures. The entire religious structure of Europe would change. Technological evolution. But conquest isn't enough. A true empire stands on knowledge. And this is where things get even more interesting. Vikings are often described as barbarians. But that's not accurate. They had advanced shipbuilding technology, the ability to navigate using the stars, a deep understanding of nature. Now imagine, what if that knowledge had been directed towards science instead of raiding? Vikings could have turned navigation into a formal science. Early on, navigation tools would improve. The maps would develop faster. Ocean travel would become routine. And most importantly, unlike much of Europe, Vikings didn't see nature as something to dominate, but something to understand. That alone could reshape scientific thought. Maybe the Industrial Revolution wouldn't begin in England, but in a Scandinavian-centered empire. And technology might evolve in harmony with nature. Less pollution, more sustainability. But progress doesn't always bring peace, because technology plus a warrior culture is a dangerous combination. Global impact. Now we reach the wildest part. The Vikings already reached America, but they didn't stay. In this scenario, they do. They established permanent colonies in North America. And those colonies grow over time. Imagine this: no New York, no Washington. Instead, Nordvik, Finland, Thorheim. And more importantly, a connection between Europe and America is established 500 years earlier. What does that mean? The Industrial Revolution begins earlier. Trade becomes global sooner. Technology spreads rapidly. In other words, the modern world arrives much earlier. A better world or chaos? But it's not that simple. A massive Viking empire would also bring massive risks, because Viking culture was war-driven, power-based, harsh and unforgiving. So the real question becomes, would the world be more advanced or more chaotic? Maybe faster technological progress, but more frequent wars. Or perhaps the opposite. One dominant empire could create a long period of peace. But one thing is certain: the world we know today would be completely different. And maybe right now, instead of thinking in English, you'd be thinking in Old Norse. Final thought: history is shaped by small decisions, with massive consequences, and sometimes, just one alliance had formed, the entire world could have changed. So what do you think? If the Vikings had truly united, would the world be a better place? Or would that power destroy everything? Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments.